Very good question if you're worried about fossil fuels, because nuclear is a low carbon dioxide emission technology. It is. And so you can say, well, it could displace coal, and so we could solve the problem of climate change. One of the things to remember is you don't want to be aggravating other problems while solving the problem of climate change. One of those other problems is the problem of nuclear proliferation. What happens if we use nuclear power to solve the problem of climate change? How many of you have heard, well, we should do like the French. They've solved this nuclear problem. How many have heard this? I want to see how effective the messaging is of the nuclear industry. Quite good, better than knowing there's David Freeman. So what I'm about to say is not anti-French. It's not about the French. I love the French. I love them so much I sleep next to one of them every day. The same one. Okay. So I know French, and I've studied the French nuclear system, and I've occasionally go there. If you want to see a study on their waste, a repository, 250 pages in French, you can find it on our website, IER.org. You can also find an English summary. I'm not trying to pull a fast one over anybody. Although in this part of the world, you may know, more people may know French, being closer to Quebec than other parts of the United States, other than Louisiana, which is the closest to Quebec. The culture. If we were to be like the French, we would have to build about 7,000, 8,000 nuclear reactors in the next 40 years to get 80% of our electricity worldwide from nuclear reactors. You have to build about 4 enrichment plants. So this is half, 50% of the way to France. All these reactors would make 200,000 bombs worth of plutonium every year. That bottom thing is a plutonium metal button, as it is called, stuff from which bombs are made. The Nagasaki bomb was made from stuff like that. The top picture is a centrifuge enrichment plant. One plant like that in Iran has caused a global security headache of very major proportions, and possibly a military crisis. There's been a lot of talk of military strikes, war, no option off the table. Okay. One. You want 2, 3, 4 every year somewhere in the world. And you have to make that many because you need more than that to be there, but that many will wear out every year. You've got to replace them. Now, you cannot use this plutonium to make bombs. What happens in a nuclear reactor is you put uranium fuel, and most of that uranium actually doesn't work as a fuel. Most of that uranium is not useful as a reactor fuel. But it can be turned into plutonium. So some of it does turn into plutonium in a reactor. It's part of the reactor magic. I can show you the physics if you want later on. So what the French do, and here's what they mean when they say the French have solved the problem of nuclear waste. Okay. Here's what the French do. They take the spent fuel, the used up fuel, and they send it to a large chemical factory in the Normandy Peninsula, actually not far from the famous D-Day beaches. And in a place called Le Havre. They have this huge factory, 2 units actually, at Le Havre. And they chop up this used up fuel, and they have a giant chemical tank in which they dissolve this, and they separate it into its various constituents. And then they get the plutonium, and they make fuel out of it, and they reuse. So that's why you heard the French are recycling nuclear waste. That much is true. Okay, but when you send the plutonium to a nuclear reactor at 5% plutonium and 95% uranium, that's the composition of the fuel. You get used up fuel that still has 2% plutonium left in it. And now it's nastier, more degraded spent fuel, and very hard to reuse, so you have to get rid of it. So there's that piece of the waste problem that arises from using plutonium as a fuel, so it hasn't been solved. Plutonium is only 1% of the waste. Just 1%. What about the other 99%? You haven't heard about that. 4% is fission products. That's when the atom splits and gives you energy, it gives you fission products. Most of the radioactivity, almost all the radioactivity in these fission products is waste. The French cast it in the glass logs. I should have a picture of the glass logs. They're about that high and they're about that wide in metal cylinders that are that big. And they're all stored at La Hague. Nowhere to put them. So here, waste is piling up in your reactors here. Over there, it is piling up at La Hague in the Normandy Peninsula. There's not much difference. All right. The French electricity company is 85% government owned, about. Their reprocessing company is 85% government owned. They spend 2 cents a kilowatt hour more for plutonium fuel for every kilowatt hour, and they get less than 10% of their electricity out of that fuel. And they can do that because the government, they got one hand in the ratepayer's pocketbook, another hand in the taxpayer's pocketbook, and nobody knows the difference because all government-owned entities to 85%. What about the other 95%? So we got 1%, we got 4%. The other 95% is leftover uranium, which is now contaminated with plutonium and neptunium and fission products. And you can't reuse it very easily because it contaminates your processing equipment. And the French used to send it to Russia. That's not a solution. And now the Russians are wealthier, so it's piling up in France. So 95% is piling up, 4% is piling up, 1% you're reusing, and 40% of that is left, so 99.4% is piling up. And that's recycling? Okay, and you're spending more money. Plus, let me show you here. You see that bottom right picture? It's kind of murky because it's an underwater picture taken by Greenpeace. It is a discharge pipe from the chemical factory at La Hague, where they extract this plutonium. They discharge 100 million gallons of radioactive waste into the English Channel every year, and they have polluted the oceans all the way to the Arctic in the process of the 0.6% recycling. 12 out of 15 Western European governments have said, Uncle, please stop polluting the ocean. They have accords called the Oslo-Paris Accord, the OSPAR Accord. And Britain and France have said, no, we won't stop. Britain also is reprocessing. You know, Britain discharged in the Irish Sea, the French discharged in the English Channel, and everything's okay. All right. That was a joke. But it all washes back on their own beaches, you know.
Can I ask you a question?
Yeah,
what
sure.
do the Spanish and the Germans and the Portuguese do?
Well, the Germans used to be, they don't have reprocessing plants. They have, Portuguese, I don't know if they have nuclear reactors or not. Certainly the Germans have nuclear reactors, and they used to be sending their waste to France for reprocessing and getting the plutonium back, and then they didn't have anything to do with the spent fuel, and they had a lot of problems with what to do, and you need a deep hole in the ground to dispose off this stuff, and nobody in the world has one yet. And the Germans had a lot of internal dissension over their deep geologic repository, which was proposed for a place called Gorleben. And then eventually the Germans decided they didn't like nuclear power, and they decided to phase it out. And they're like everywhere else in the world, now they're thinking, what should we do about global warming, and should we revisit this decision? So this is a live question from Monroe County to across the ocean. And the only place it isn't a live question is mostly places where governments are making decisions like Fiat about this. And you don't want that to happen. It's a good thing. I appreciate, especially speaking in a library. Librarians are my favorite people. Absolutely my favorite. Thank you very much. One of the first people I hired in my institute was a professional librarian. I think it's libraries are one of the great treasures of the country. And librarians are also a great treasure. And I say that not just because I'm speaking in the library. And you can ask my librarian.